Hello and welcome to the Inner Sanctum online gatherings with guest teacher Laurie Williams. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you so much.
We're going to do a mini workshop today in the Inner Sanctum, but we're going to chat a bit about controlled remote viewing and what it is. Because I was saying to you last night, Laurie, that I was telling a girlfriend about it, and she said, "What is it?" And I did a very poor explanation of what controlled remote viewing is. So can you give us a better explanation?
Yeah, I sure can. So, well, first of all, I think everybody has those moments of spontaneous intuition where you just know something and you don't even know how you know it. Maybe you think you should go a certain way to work instead of the normal way you take, and then you find out that the normal way had a terrible accident, or you think of someone you haven't thought of in a long time and then they call you. And so that sort of thing happens all the time for most people, or at least once in a while. And imagine if you could control that, if you actually had the ability, instead of being the tail wagging the dog, if you had the ability to control those spontaneous bursts of intuition, how could that affect your relationships or your career or your choices, your life? So what controlled remote viewing is, it's a written set of protocols that you do with your eyes open, sitting at a desk with a piece of paper, and you're actually writing things down in a certain structure on the paper, and you're just letting thoughts flow, and you're writing everything down, and you're writing it in a certain pattern in a way that helps to separate true psychic perceptions from imagination, extraneous thoughts and things. And so it's really a fascinating self-discovery tool, number one, but it's also a great way to tap into your intuition. And it was designed really to teach, to take an ordinary soldier off the front lines and teach him to tap into his intuition. So it works great with people who feel like, look, buddy, I don't have a psychic bone in my body. And it also works really well. I have a number of students who are professional psychics and who were extremely successful before ever hearing of remote viewing, and who've taken my classes numerous times. Some of them have had really successful television shows and things like that. And they say, I'm like, why would you bother taking this when you're already successful? Oh, because it's increased my psychic ability 400%. It's taught me how I can do this. Oh, there's sirens outside. I hope that doesn't bother the recording. Anyway, it's taught me how to do things at the drop of a hat, that I don't have to be in a perfect meditative state, for example, to get information. I don't have to have perfect conditions in order to get information. And so it's a wonderful technique. And it was actually used originally by the US military, who went to the think tank, the top secret think tank, Stanford Research Institute, back during the Cold War between Russia and the United States, and said, hey, the Russians are getting our secrets, and we've had this guy defect, and it turns out that they have a psychic spying program. So if they have one, we got to have one, figure it out. And so the guys at Stanford hired a man named Ingo Swann, who was this amazing psychic artist. He just died a couple of years ago, but an amazing psychic artist who did some phenomenal psychic demonstrations. Excuse me. And so they hired him to figure out a way that you could literally, sitting there with your eyes open, conscious, very, very awake, and do some type of strategic, step-by-step structure that would help you actually get answers to anything in all of time or space. And so nowadays, what do we use it for? I'm sure that the government still uses it for spying, but other than that, we use it for archaeological programs. We actually worked with an archaeologist who had been searching in an area of ocean for 40 years, believing there were artifacts that would prove there had been a city in this location in the ocean. He wasn't looking for Atlantis, but he really believed that there had been a pre-Adamic city in this one location of the ocean. So it was a 200 square mile area, which is sizable. And we had 12 remote viewers working on it with 4 project managers. And long story short, with just a blank map with the corners marked, these 12 viewers were able to pinpoint a location, give him GPS coordinates, and tell him what he would find there. And he took divers and boats out there, found it at the exact GPS location, and found amazing things, walls with inscriptions on them, pillars, archways, and many things. And they're still in the process of pulling that up. And we're hoping that we'll be able to actually share everything very publicly soon. But it was an exciting project. We also use it for elusive medical diagnoses. I have a number of students who are physicians. We also use it for realtors, for example. Imagine if you were a realtor and you have, sometimes realtors have these customers like me who might have them showing houses for 2 years before they find the one they want. But imagine if you could sit down and say, okay, I need a description of the house this couple is going to buy. And then they buy the first house you show them or the second house you show them, because you're only showing them houses that meet the descriptions that you came up with in your remote viewing session. And so you could really increase sales. So I have a number of realtors who use it that way. We have businesses who use it, entrepreneurs who use it to increase their business or to make better business decisions and choices. And there's just so many applications now. It's especially really good for choices and decision making. So you can.
I was just thinking about all the practical applications. As I was explaining it to my girlfriend, I was thinking, why would you want to do this? But just sitting here listening to you, Laurie, if you lose something, you can just like remote view it, or
exactly.
Just but really listening to you, because it's teaching people how to really get a hold of their psychic ability in a really sort of structured way, as you say, a set of protocols. It should be taught in every school. Like this should be taught.
That's what I think. I think you and I might have talked about that when we talked last year, or whenever it was, about a year ago, I think we talked.
Yeah.
And I think it should be an elective in every high school. And I think if it were taught, it's such a practical thing. It's really just teaching about brain science. Sometimes when I meet someone in a crowd who just wants a quick answer to, oh, what do you do for a living? And I think, I'm not going to get into a huge conversation with them. I just say, I teach brain science. I actually had these scientists from India contact me. They said, we were looking up brain science and we found your website. And the thing is that it really is a study of the interaction between the right and left sides of the brain, and conscious versus subconscious. And so it's fascinating, the things you learn when you take this course. And it's the best self-discovery tool that I've ever found, because you learn so much about your own prejudices. You learn about all the stereotypes that you have in your mind, about things. So it's really, really fascinating.
Here's a question that a lot of people ask me when they ask about their psychic ability. How do I know that I'm actually receiving some information that's true and I'm not just making it up? I get that question all the time, which I have to say is a question that I ask all the time. I just learned to trust my first thought. That was what I did. It's like I'm being given information, and before my logical mind, it kicks in and just dismisses it, I got to grab it. I got to grab that first thought. But if you have a set of protocols, what would you say? How can you trust it?
Well, the most important thing to do is to practice. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. The most important thing is to practice with provable feedback. There's a lot of people out there claiming to teach remote viewing, and really what they're teaching is guided meditation. And they might say, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to remote view this distant planet in this distant galaxy. And so you close your eyes, you say, oh, it's the most fabulous thing in the world. I'm seeing these aliens and, just going off. But the thing is, if you don't ever have provable feedback, you're just kidding yourself, essentially. And, how do we know what you're getting is real or not? I even had once a student who came to take the class for the first time. And she told me on the first day, she said, oh my gosh, before I left home, I had a vision of the hospital where I work, and they were doing triage on all these people, and it was this horrible disaster. And when I get back, I'm going to warn my boss and tell him to get all this equipment and to make sure to stock up on supplies. And I said, well, wait a minute. How often have you had a vision like this? She said, oh, this is the first time. I said, then do not say a word to your boss, because you don't have a track record of accuracy. If you could say to your boss, listen, whenever I have a vision like this, whatever I am having the vision about happens within 2 weeks, and it's happened to me 50 times, then you have a track record that you can bank on. But without that, you could be just kidding yourself. So when people say, how do I know that a psychic thing is right? What you have to do is you have to develop not only a track record of accuracy, but you also have to develop a really trusting relationship between conscious and subconscious. And when they first start working together, there's often some sibling rivalry there. And we have an analogy that we call the president of the company analogy. So imagine if you were the president of a company that you've been running for years and years, and suddenly the CEO of the board of directors comes and says, Karen, we want somebody else to run the company for a couple weeks. Just go take a vacation. Go off to Bermuda or Hawaii or something and take a vacation. And so immediately your reaction is what? You're going to feel a little insecure. You know, this is my baby. Who's coming to run the company? And then they say, well, don't worry, Karen. We're going to have your daughter run the company for a couple weeks. We'll have your daughter run the company. So, and then you're conflicted because you want your daughter to do well, but you don't want her to make you look bad. So what do you do? And so if you're really going off to vacation, you're going to keep checking in. How's it going? You know, how's it going, sweetie? How's everything? Tell me what's happening. Oh, Mom, I had this great idea. I want to do XYZ with the company. Well, why don't you wait till I get back and we'll look at that together. You're going to continually interfere, right? So then what they finally have to do is they say, this experiment is not working. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take Karen and we're going to have to send her down to the docks and have her stack boxes, you know, to get her out of the way. And so that's what the controlled remote viewing structure does. It seems very complex when you first learn it, and people are like, why does this have to be so complicated? Well, the reason is because we want to get the conscious mind so busy that it's out of the way, and it can get out of the subconscious mind's way, and the subconscious mind can actually have a voice. Because right now, for most people who don't have a relationship with the subconscious, the only way their subconscious ever speaks to them is through dreams or through aches, pains, and disease.
Right.
The subconscious mind communicates through the body. Mm-hmm. You know, how many times have you ever been driving, you pull in your driveway and you go, I don't remember how I even got here. I was so lost in thought that, you know, about that crazy guy my daughter's dating, or, you know, whatever you're thinking about. And you pull in your driveway and you say, I don't remember driving the last few blocks. Who was driving the car? Who was keeping you safe? You know, it's the body working with the subconscious, and the subconscious mind controls the body, and the conscious mind controls the body. So the body is the only link that can speak to both conscious and subconscious minds. So everything we do in controlled remote viewing is done through the body. Right. It's a physical discipline, like a martial art. And so, and I consider the structure of it, the written structure, to be very much like, does everybody have those junk drawers where you have rubber bands and paper clips and toothpicks and, you know, all this sort of thing? The structure of controlled remote viewing is like it's like an organizing drawer for your brain, and it's a little cubicle, a little cubby for every thought, and you organize it on the page, and that way it just separates true psychic perception, and so it's great. It's like if you imagine that you're drawing a line down the middle of your page, and on the right side of the page, the right brain is the intuitive brain, right? That's where all of our psychic stuff comes from. And that's where language, art, creativity, intuition, all those things are right brain. The left brain is logic, analysis, right? It's all those things, math, those kinds of things. So what they did was they said, well, the right brain kind of controls the left side of the body, and the left brain controls the right side of the body. So what we're going to do is we're going to say the right side of the page is for the left brain, and the left side of the page is for the right brain. Now, right away, that's complex. And people go, oh, that's so complicated. But again, we want to keep the president busy. We want to keep the conscious mind busy at the docks, taking care of things.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about keeping the logical or the conscious mind busy so that you can communicate with the subconscious or superconscious. Because, you know, so many people say, I was having this conversation with Dr. Leo Galland, who was a New York specialist whose dead son came to speak to him. But he said, you know, I had these conversations while I was at the sink washing the dishes. and he was sort of thinking about something, like he was thinking, like he was doing something. He was busy, often people. I always have great ideas in the shower where you're doing something. You clean, like you're kind of busy in the doing of the normal life,
Exactly.
and then the other part of you sort of kicks in. I have to say, or even driving the car, like when you're driving the car, you've got this conversation going on while you're thinking about driving the car. Like you say, I don't know who drives my car half the times. I swear it's the angels, because I never remember driving the car.
Exactly. It's amazing how doing something rote, like folding laundry, you'll have some of the best revelations when you're doing that sort of thing. Years ago, I had a very famous medium tell me that I was a trance medium, because these really strange things would happen every time I spaced out. In fact, I even wrote a blog just recently when something happened. I don't know if in Australia you heard about this, but you folks in the States will remember when the engine blew up on the Southwest airline plane recently and sucked the woman out of the window. Well, I was sitting in that seat the day before that happened, the exact seat of that plane. And I had fallen asleep, and when I woke up, I was just sitting there staring out the window at the engine, and all of a sudden, in my mind's eye, the engine blew up and sucked me out of the window. But it was all in my imagination, but it was very real. And then I suddenly went, what am I thinking? Why am I letting myself think these things? I just sort of had this like, snap out of it kind of thing. And then the very next day, that actually happened to the woman who was sitting in that very seat. And I've had that sort of thing happen quite a few times, a number of times in my life. So it's, a lot of times if you just space out and you're just relaxing, that's when things will really happen, will come to you.
Wow,
interesting thing is I
incredible.
actually teach a healing course called CRV Healing Applications. And it's actually about using CRV for healing. It's a really great healing tool, and there's a number of techniques that we teach in that class. All my classes are 3-day courses, 3-day workshops, and it's a 3-day workshop. It's actually my favorite workshop, and it's the one that probably all the classes seem to blow people's mind. But you would think after taking basic, intermediate, and advanced with me that you kind of get maybe a little jaded or kind of used to it, familiarity. But boy, then you take that one, it's just as mind-blowing as the other ones. You just go, oh my gosh. And I remember coming when I took it with Lynn Buchanan and was just, oh my gosh, that's the most amazing class I've ever taken. And so yes, and that we've actually experienced some amazing healings with it. It's quite phenomenal, the amount of healing that you can do, and it is all through the body. And the interesting thing too is that we to protect the healer, because there's a lot of healing techniques that involve going into the person's body. And I remember that there was a movie years ago with Ellen Bernstein, I think it had in it. She has this terrible accident and has a near-death experience, and then she has this amazing healing ability. But whenever she goes to heal someone, like someone had like this terrible crippling arthritis and they're all like this, and she goes to work on the person and heal him, and all of a sudden she's like this as well, which is one of the dangers of certain types of healing techniques, because you can literally take on the person's illness, right? So this particular technique is really great because it has some protective mechanisms built in to protect the healer. And so
can we just talk about a couple of those? Protection. What would be one of those that if you're focused on someone, sending them healing, that you're not going to take on that energy?
One of the techniques that we teach in the class is a technique called the building analogy. And what it is you first work on yourself, and you get really, really accomplished at doing this with you first. And what you do is you get into a meditative state, and you say, okay, I'm going to imagine myself as an office building, for example. And you're in this meditative state, and then you say, okay, and what's really surprising is if you're actually in a meditative state and you just say, show me my building, the building is often not what you would expect. Because the first time I took the course, I didn't catch it that we were supposed to do this in a meditative thing. And because nothing that Lynn Buchanan teaches is done in a meditative state. So I didn't catch that you were supposed to do this in meditation. And so I was like, oh, my building is going to be gold and glass. And, I had this whole thing in my mind of what my building would look like. And instead, when I actually got into a meditative state and asked to see what my building looked like, it was like this tall kind of tower-like building that was made of brick and had really dark windows, and it was very narrow. And it was kind of like on the bald prairie. I was like, oh no, that's not the way I want my building to look at all. And then interestingly, because of course, reality is not what we think it is. When I would go into the building, there would be long hallways going off in both directions, even though from the outside it looked like a tall, narrow thing. It had these long hallways going off in different directions and all these things. And so what you do in the course, we teach you how to kind of explore your building and what all the different parts of the buildings and the floors of the buildings and the people who work in the building, all the different aspects of the building and how they kind of symbolize different things in your life. And if you visit your building on a regular basis, you create this kind of thing on an astral plane in a way. And the building becomes analogous to your life in every way. So you have the maintenance people that you can go to and talk to when there's a physical illness or problem, like there's high blood pressure. So you go down, you talk to the maintenance people, and you're like, well, and they're like, yeah, there's a lot of pressure in the pipes. We've got too much steam in the pipes, and we need to release some of that and lower the pressure, and so you're using the building as a protective mechanism because you're not working with the body and the blood and the veins and the arteries. You're working with this building, and everything is analogous to the body, but you're not actually looking at it as the body. And the cool thing is when you're going in and you're working in your own building, you might go in, for example, and notice that there's a painting that's crooked on the wall, and you straighten the painting. And then the next day you go into meditation, you go into your building, and that painting is crooked again, and you straighten it. And then the next day you're in meditation, you go in, and the painting is crooked again, and you keep straightening it and straightening it and straightening it. And finally, one day you go in, and the painting isn't crooked. And you realize that something in your life has really corrected itself, through your continual working on the buildings, picking up chairs that are tipped over, cleaning up messes.
That's brilliant.
Things. Yeah, and then eventually when you get to where you really know your own building and you've really worked on your self-sound and you become quite accomplished at that analogy, then we teach a whole technique for working your way into other people's buildings and fixing things in other people's buildings. And you don't actually have to go fix it. You actually have to convince the person to work with you. On a subconscious level, you can contact the person through some techniques we have so that you can work with the person subconsciously to persuade them to help you work on their building. And that way the person is being involved in their own healing, and you're persuading them to heal themselves. And there's a ton of different techniques we teach that go along with this, but it all starts out with this building analogy. So it's very interesting, and it's a great way to protect the healer from getting, taking on this person's illnesses.
Wow, I've never heard that before. I love that. Am I muted? No.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Yeah, isn't that neat? It's a really cool mechanism.
I've learned healing like that, but I've done medical, what do you call it? When you look inside, like I can effectively and efficiently look inside people's bodies. And when I learned this years ago, when I was in my 30s, I was a massage therapist, and what I realized that I had already been doing it when I massaged people, but because I had learnt naturopathy and physiology, and I'd learnt the structure of the body, I just thought that I knew what it looked like, so that I wasn't looking, that I was just remembering. I didn't kind of connect the dots until I learned how to look inside people's bodies. But it's interesting because when you do project your consciousness inside someone's body and you come back out again, you can come out with some of that energy, and you kind of forget to clear it off, which is, I think I do that all the time. So having a building, yeah.
I actually have a number of really great transformation stories. One is that when I first started this journey, working with Lynn Buchanan, he would give me a target, and if it had anything high up in the air, I just wouldn't go there. I was totally blind to what the target was, and I would be describing things on the ground quite well. But then when he would ask me, to move up, I just wouldn't do it. And he finally said, "Do you have a fear of heights?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I have a terrible fear of heights." So, so he started having me occasionally, like every 2 or 3 targets, he would give me like a hot air balloon or the highest roller coaster in the world, or, parachutists or things like that, acrobats in the sky, like Cirque du Soleil type things. And eventually I became so desensitized to these height targets that I went right after 9/11. My son was stationed at Cape Canaveral, and Busch Gardens amusement park opened their doors for free to the military and their families. And we went to Busch Gardens and there was no one there. And all day long we rode, without having to get in line or anything, we were able to ride these massive roller coasters. And I was the only one that didn't get sick, that didn't have any kind of adverse effects, and since then I've gone bungee jumping, like wrapped like a taco onto a bungee cord and dropped from like 600 feet. I've gone parasailing, over the ocean, 600 feet in the air, attached to a kite. I've done things I would have never been able to do before, because it totally helped me get over my fear of heights. Another guy, I had a doctor who came and took my course. He was a pediatric oncologist. And he was very stiff and very unfriendly and very not funny, and he didn't laugh at my jokes. That's a big problem. So he's in the class, and he's taking the class, and the one of his targets was these smiling Vietnamese guys wearing those like wife beater t-shirts, the white sleeveless t-shirts, and they're in the back. They're kind of sweaty, and they're in the back of this pickup truck, and they're like, one of them's holding a bicycle, and there's one holding a chicken. They're just these guys crowded in the back of this pickup truck. So the guy starts describing the land around the pickup truck, and he's doing a great job, and he's describing like a house in the background, and he's describing various things in the photo, but he's missing the pickup truck, which is the center piece of the photo with the guys in the back. And every time I would say, well, he said there's something man-made in the middle of the photo, and I would say move to the man-made, he'd say, no, I'm hiding in the bushes, or he'd say something like that, just would blurt out of his mouth, and he had no idea what the picture was in the envelope. And finally, when he was done and he pulls out the picture, he was very disappointed, because he had obviously been the sharpest bulb in the pack in class, in his medical field, and so he was like, oh, I didn't do that great. So the next day when he came to class, I said, let's look at that picture again. So we pull out the picture, and I said, is there anything in this picture that you would have reason to avoid? And he said, yes, I was sexually molested by men in t-shirts like that when I was 10 years old. Oh. And oh my God, I mean, you could hear a pin drop in the room, because no one expected this revelation from this man who had been so terse the whole class. And then I noticed too that he kept a pull chain, like, what those pull chains look like from a fan, that have the little metal balls, pull chains with the metal balls. And he had it like in a big circle where he had it connected so that it was a circle. And he constantly played with these little balls all day. Mm-hmm. And so I looked at him and I said, are you counting those balls? And he said, yes, I count them obsessively. There's 263 balls on this chain. And I said, well, that counting like that, obsessive counting like that, is an attempt to regain control. And, at some point you felt that you lost control, and now you're trying to regain it by counting obsessively. And he said, oh, that makes total sense, because I started doing this when I was around 10, around the time that I was molested.
Right.
And so it was really interesting. And then he said also that another reason that picture had affected him so strongly was because these Vietnamese people were refugees. And he said, and I was a refugee at one time. So then the third day of class, his target was these 3 men wearing wetsuits, and they were sitting on this rock in the middle of water, and they were holding a bag of gold, and they were divers, I guess, and they had found these gold bags of bullion or something, gold. And he described the bag of gold, he described the water, he described the rock, he described everything but the 3 men. And then he's about to finish the session, and I said, is there anything else at the target that you might be avoiding? He goes, there's 3 men. Because there's 3 men. And then he goes and he describes the men beautifully. And afterwards, about a week after the class ended, he wrote me a letter. He said, "This was the most transformative week of my entire life." He said, I've never experienced anything like this. And it's changed my life dramatically. And after that, we became really good friends. And then he laughed at my jokes. But anyway, I'm sorry. I think I've got something in my eye. That's why I put it in an envelope. And I say, okay, Karen, I want you to describe what's in this envelope. We have a mantra.
That's how you
describe, don't identify.
Right.
Okay, that's the mantra. So then Karen says, oh, I think whatever's in that envelope is red, smooth, and shiny.
Right.
I bet it's an apple. I bet it's an apple. So we pull the picture out, and it's a fire engine.
Right.
Okay, so it is red, smooth, and shiny, but it's not an apple. And so the left brain is the thing that wants to name stuff and identify stuff. And that has kept us alive as a species, because Oog and Og walking through the primeval forest and a twig snaps behind him, the one who says, what was that, is the guy who gets eaten. The one who's running and saying saber-toothed tiger before he even looks behind him is the one who saves the day, right? So it's identifying things is actually a survival mechanism, and it's a function of the left brain. But the right brain is the thing that that describes things. And so we want to really develop that ability to describe rather than identify, because oftentimes when I work a lot of times with professional psychics, a lot of times they think the answer is in the noun. Okay, so we're going to talk about grammar for a minute here. They think the answer is in the noun. Like they'll be working with a policeman, for example, and they'll go, oh my God, he killed her with a knife. And the policeman's like, yeah, we know that, lady. That's not why we need you. We need you to help us find the knife, or, whatever. You know what I mean? So then we need a description of the location where we can find this person. So so a lot of times the nouns are already known information. And that's not what the police need. But I watch people so often who just are hung up on naming whatever it is. They want to name it. And it's really funny, because one time I was working with this professional psychic. She's had 2 television shows. She's super successful. And she was telling me, she said, I was working with this policeman, and I said, oh my God, he was stabbing her. He was stabbing her like this. And the policeman said, no, he wasn't stabbing her. She said, yes, I see him stabbing her. He said, no, he beat her to death with a baseball bat. So she saw him going like this, and she just conjured up the knife in his hand. And so whereas if she had just said to the policeman, I see him going like this, that would have made sense to the policeman, because, he knew that she had been beaten to death with a baseball bat. There was another really famous psychic who was working on a show called Psychic Detectives. And she said the murderer works with a mechanical thing that revolves like a merry-go-round. So the police immediately went to carnivals and started looking for the murderer in these carnivals. And then when they finally caught the murderer, it turned out he drove a cement truck. And a cement truck is always revolving and tumbling the cement. And so he did work with something mechanical that revolved, but it wasn't a merry-go-round. So the minute she brought the noun into it, she threw the police completely off the trail. And so that's why we have this mantra, describe, don't identify, because if you just start with that premise, you can describe anything in all of time and space. But we do want a target to be a hard target that you can later look at and score your results. So if this was my target, if I said, okay, I have a picture of something in an envelope, and this happened to be what the picture was of, then, you'd be describing the texture, the shape, the temperature. This had cold water in it, so it's cold. You'd be describing maybe if there were smells to it. This is just water, so it doesn't have much of a smell. But you'd be checking it out in all your ways, and then afterwards you'd pull the photo out and you would score everything you said based on this. And you would get either some things would be right, some things would be wrong, and maybe there might be some things you couldn't feed back on, because what if I thought it smelled like lemons? I might not know if it has lemon in it, so I couldn't actually feed back on that. But then that way you actually have a score. So recently when I was on Coast to Coast AM, I don't know if you know what that program is. It's pretty popular here in the States. But in Coast to Coast, we talked about track records. and how when you're doing an esoteric target, one for which there is no feedback, the only way you can put any kind of credibility into the response, to the information gotten on Sasquatch is, for example, that's just an example, but I did this target they gave me was Sasquatch, and I said, okay, and she was like, oh my gosh, all this information you got really proves blah, 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 blah. I said, no, it doesn't prove anything, actually, because Sasquatch, unless somebody catches one and we can really find out all the ins and outs of Sasquatch. At this point in time, we don't have any proof of anything, and it could just be my wild imagination. But I said I do have an 87% accuracy rate across the board, considering things like colors, textures, temperatures, smells, sounds, tastes, all those types of things, shapes, sizes, patterns, positions, and even things like conceptual information, like religious, touristy, fun, educational. Those are concepts that you can't touch, right? So I have an overall 87% accuracy rate in hundreds of professional targets. So you could say, well, okay, how much do we want to believe what Lori, the remote viewer, got about Sasquatch? Well, you could say, well, I'm going to believe her 87% based on a track record of 87% accuracy.
There's so many people needing there to be physical proof of things that are non-physical. At some point, you just got to give up the I need to have physical proof, because like life after death, are you talking to my dead mother, or spirit guides? And at some point there is no physical proof that will ever convince, because physical proof, like our perceptual ability through our physical senses, is very limited on the spectrum of what we can perceive, like the light spectrum, the hearing spectrum. It's just very limited. So people demanding physical proof are kind of demanding a very limited perspective view of the world in many ways. At some point you just have to, like if you're viewing Sasquatch and there's no physical proof of a Sasquatch, at some point you have to trust your gut. You have to say, is this true? Is she true? Is what she telling me true? And you have to trust that distinguishable feeling that you feel, whether it's BS or truth, you have to trust that. And that's not a physical thing either. It's like a trusting your knowing, your intuition.
What's hilarious about the Sasquatch thing is that I had no interest in Sasquatch in my life, and never thought about Sasquatch, had no interest in Sasquatch. And so when I did this target, it was a very profound experience for me. Yeah. And afterwards I thought, do I even want to share this on the air? Because I'm basically saying that Sasquatch's defense mechanism is that he can travel through time. That he can actually disappear and travel through time. And that sounded really wild to me. The hilarious thing is I have a number of friends who are Native Americans, and they said, oh, my tribe has known for centuries that Sasquatch is a time traveler. I was like, you're kidding. No, because I never heard that. And I'd never heard anything about Sasquatch. I just never was interested in Sasquatch. But so many unusual things happened after that I became a believer in Sasquatch after I did the session, because of that.
I'm a believer.
Yeah.
So you were wondering some of the ways that this is being used now, as a professional remote viewer. Some of the cases I've worked on, I've worked on kidnappings, I've worked on plane crashes, I've worked on missing people, a lot of missing people. Another thing that we've worked on that are interesting, kind of out of the box kind of things. I once described future technology, and it turned out to be a technology to help people communicate interdimensionally with other beings on the other side of dimensions. I've also worked on, I've helped a lot of authors. I have a lot of authors. I even have New York Times #1 best-selling authors among my students, and they say it's really helped their creativity. And I once worked for an author, did a remote viewing project for an author who was doing a historical fiction on a famous, character from the 1600s, and they didn't know where this character had gone. They knew he had taken a journey for a number of years, and they didn't know where he had traveled. So I got somebody sent me a blank map that was just a big piece of paper with 4 corners marked. And I actually dowsed this map showed where this person went, and then outlined certain places where this person had stopped and then described what happened at each place. So my target essentially was a journey. You asked what a target could be. In that particular instance, my target was a journey, and I was asked to describe the journey. And so, some of the common things that we use as targets are the target is a location, especially in missing person cases. The target is a location, the target is an activity, the target is an event, the target is man-made, especially if you need a description of some mechanical thing. Like a lot of times in the military, they had to describe weapons that were being developed by other countries. So that would be the target is a man-made, describe the target. And then things like the target is a person. When you're looking for who committed the crime and you need a physical description, then usually all the viewer's told is the target is a person, describe the target. Because if you
Laurie, it's been just fascinating today. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday night with us, Sunday morning here in Aussie. So close to, the silly season, Christmas and everything. I just really wish that this was in every school. I really do. I just think just need to change. This education is just, wouldn't kids be engaged in school if they got taught stuff and then some, not just remote control. I remember listening to, Susie Hansen, who I had on the show, who's an ET, right? And she goes up to the ship. And she talked about what she does up there with and they have classes on the ship. And one of the classes, she said that, they were dematerializing their bodies and rematerializing their bodies into different things. So the power of deliberate creation in that, this is the power of us being deliberate. It's like, as you say, it's giving us protocols on an aspect of our mind that we haven't ever been taught to use anywhere unless we go and do some sort of psychic course or remote control view or into. And I think every human being needs to understand how to deliberately focus and deliberately understand their subconscious. It's just fascinating. Listen to that cat purring.
It is.
Sorry.
It's just fascinating. I want to thank you so much for spending time with us.
People, I've got a book that will be coming out.
Ooh.
And it's going to actually cover phase 1, and then there'll be one for phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5, phase 6. But that's actually going to be like a how-to. And then again, I have the class coming up January 11th through 13th. You can check out the calendar. We have classes every single month. Not all basic, though, but we do have classes every month. I think I'm the only teacher out there now that's teaching way beyond the advanced course. So, I'd love to have you join us in a class. We do teach online, so you don't have to travel and pay for hotel and all that. And yet, you can, if you're one of these people who's like, I can't learn online, we also teach in person still. We're one of the few who still have in-person classes as well. So, so just, check it out. Check out the website, the books. I do have a book that's already, you can buy on Amazon, that is called, I'll show you, it's called Monitoring. And it's a book for my students that I wrote so they could train someone to monitor them in their remote viewing sessions. They found when they kept data in the website, in the unit, the military unit, that sessions that had a monitor were much more accurate and successful with greater amounts of data and information than ones that were done alone, solo. So the monitoring book is it's at this point, it might not mean a lot to you because you haven't taken the course, but once you take the course, the monitoring book is gold. It's very helpful. The military guys were like, man, we wish we had this book when we were doing the military, back in the military program. Thank you so much.
You talked a lot about military. I have to say I can't relate to the whole military stuff, but I know that that's where your trainings come from. I don't think I'll be remote viewing criminals or warheads or anything, or looking for espionage or looking to look into secret files. But it is all fascinating, yeah. And
it really is. And some of the students use it for actually communicating with ETs. And I was hired by MUFON to do a number of paid sessions where I actually was in spaceships, describing the spaceships and the ETs and the whole 9 yards. So, you can really, if there's no limit, you can look at whatever you want to look at.
Yeah, there's no limit.
Anything in time and space.
There's no limit. There's no limit.
On my website, if you go to, I think it's under Other or something, there's a section called Media, and you'll see actual sessions that I've done. I also have a blog. If you go back several pages on the blogs, there's one called 18 Years of Excitement that has actual sessions that I've done and stuff, so if you're interested in that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Have a Merry Christmas to everybody.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, and thank you again. Lots of love. Mwah! Big love.
Bye.